Kia ora koutou, everybody. Thank you so much for your time, for giving up your lunch hour to join myself, Jackie Maguire, and the team at Tribe today. It's a real pleasure to be able to be here with you and to share some information on what I know is a really important topic, not only for many individuals, but also if you're sitting here with a leader hat on or an organisation owner hat. I think talking about burnout, having an understanding of it, and really knowing what contributes to it and how we can shift that and prevent it is really a valuable conversation. So my hope from today is that number one, I stick to time, and at 20 past, I stop talking to answer your questions. And two, that you are able to really get something valuable and practical out of today. So let me just share my screen with you. We tested this lots of times, so it should work perfectly. I thought a good place for us to start is to go, well, what actually is burnout? And the reason I'm starting with this question is that often people say to me, Jackie, how do I tell the difference between stress and burnout? And I suppose if you start with stress gets a really bad rap. It's often seen as negative and unhelpful. But actually, stress is our internal biological response to a trigger. It enables us to switch on, to peak perform, and actually stress in itself is a really valuable biological process. What's unhelpful is if we maintain ourselves in a peak performance, high stress mode continuously without getting recovery or without getting a break. So stress in itself is not the bad thing, and it is quite different to burnout. So burnout is not a clinical term. If you sit as a clinical psychologist like I do and you look up our diagnostic manual, you won't find burnout in it. Actually, in the last few years, the World Health Organization has named burnout an occupational phenomenon. What the heck does that mean? It means that burnout really is a symptom cluster, or it's a number of factors that can come into play for an individual in a work setting. So burnout is really not a life thing, even though we can feel burnt out in life. If you're using that term, it really is tied to the workplace. And you have to have three different sets of symptoms or three different experiences going on for you to actually meet the classification of burnout. So I think if I said to you, what is burnout? Most of you would probably say, I'm bloody tired. I don't have any energy left in the tank. Like I feel like I've hit my wall. And so yes, exhaustion is one part of burnout. But often people, I think, are referring to physical exhaustion rather than broadening the horizon of exhaustion, which is that actually, yes, we can feel physically tired. And that physical tired is not just, I need a good night's sleep tonight and I'll be right tomorrow. It's that kind of bone dead, can't move your body, nothing left in the tank. I feel heavy and I just can't get myself moving. So you have the physical side to exhaustion. But actually, it's really important to look at emotional exhaustion as well, where I just don't have the capacity to respond to other people's emotions. I'm finding it really difficult to regulate my own. Or actually, for some people, if they've been experiencing burnout for a while, the fatigue from an emotional perspective can be that I go numb or I stop feeling feelings because I'm so done. So you've got one, exhaustion from a physical and psychological perspective. The second element to burnout is that I start to get negative. I start to disconnect from my work. I start to become cynical about what I'm doing, the work we're doing, and the people that are leading me. So how might you see that on the ground? You might see somebody who starts to question anything that leadership says. You might have people that become cynical or detached from the purpose of the organisation or the work you do. You might see people on Seek on a day or on a daily basis, or scrolling through Tribe's website going, I need another job, I'm out of here. So it's that kind of withdrawal and that lack of emotional connection to the work you're doing and the people you're with. The last thing that's important for burnout actually comes down to how we think about ourselves and the work we are doing. So it's really a lack of kind of confidence or a lack of efficacy or ability in my belief to do good work. I suddenly question how worthy I am, how good I am, my strengths, whether I deserve to be here. So I think that's quite different to that biological reaction to a trigger, which is stress, which enables you to peak perform in a moment, burnout really is long-term, where I feel like I've got nothing left. I become negative in my thinking cycle. I detach from my work and I start to question myself. And I suppose just to highlight for you, if I only am tired, then I'm overextended. If I'm just cynical and detached, then I'm disengaged, but I'm not burnt out. If I'm just questioning myself, potentially I've got a confidence crisis, but it doesn't mean I'm burnt out. So hopefully those words in gold there say if you only have one of those symptom lines, that does not equal burnout. And if you asked me, well, Jackie, how big a problem is this? How many people are experiencing burnout? For me, I think it's important that we look at New Zealand data because it's relevant to the world we are living in. I pulled this data from Professor Jared Haar. He's an associate professor with Massey University. He is an academic that I look up to because he's real. So he's out there doing academic scientific study, but he is absolutely able to bring his research to life. And just as I'm speaking, I know that the Tribe team behind me will be going, Jackie, you were supposed to say if you've got a question, put it in the Q&A category, not in the chat box down the bottom. So just so that I've got my housekeeping, which I did write a note about for myself, please, if you want to ask a question for today, write it in the Q&A section, not the chat. If you look at Jared's work, these are his numbers from 2023. 18% of us as New Zealanders, self-reported through diagnostic surveys that they were experiencing burnout. 36% of leaders. And I think that's just a really interesting stat to draw your attention to for a number of reasons. I think a lot of burden is placed on leaders' shoulders. They are turned to often for how are you going to support your people, what environment are you going to create, and they are really important aspects of leadership. But I also say if you are a leader on this call, you have to have capacity in your tank to lead others and provide what many people need in terms of support at work, which is a critical kind of component to preventing burnout. And you can see by those numbers that it is knackering to be a leader. It can be emotionally draining, having to be responsive, be compassionate, be clear, when perhaps I'm not feeling so good inside. And that dissonance between what I've got to present to my team and potentially what's going on for myself internally is called emotion labor. And emotion labor is a vulnerability, I think, for burnout. So, those stats are not great. They're pretty high compared to the rest of the Western world. For me, that says potentially that's why so many of you signed up to come along to today's webinar, because this is a very real issue that is impacting many of us. Look around the room if you're sitting with colleagues, 1 in 5 of your peers may be experiencing burnout, 1 in 3 of your leaders. So that's where the prevalence sits. And if I was to say to you, think back over your career, both for yourself and for the colleagues that you work with or the businesses that you have worked for. And if I was to ask you, well, what have been the main responses to burnout? If somebody is really struggling from a wellbeing perspective, if someone is, fatigued and disengaged and questioning themselves, what have been the go-to strategies that you have seen businesses or leaders employ? And my hunch will be that they are things like take a stress day. We're going to, provide you with less clients just for the next week to see if you can get back on your feet. We're going to support wellbeing by giving you gym memberships at work. We're going to swap out beer from kombucha on a Friday night drinks. And so often what I have seen is that they have been band-aid solutions, that when people are trying to, or leaders or organizations are trying to support wellbeing, trying to prevent burnout, often what we're doing is targeting intervention at the individual, and that we are just doing things that kind of provide reprieve for a little bit, but often don't have any significant long-term positive impact on the individual or the organization. And for me, that means that burnout has almost been treated like the canary in the coal mine. And for those of you that know this analogy, miners back in the day used to take a canary into a mine, and if the canary died, it was a signal that there was certain gas down there that was obviously not conducive to health and that they had to get out. What does that say? That the issue was not with the canary. The issue was with the environment, the coal mine that those miners were going into. And so if you think the same thing about an organization, if you've got an individual experiencing burnout, if you've got more than one individual experiencing burnout, then I bet my bottom dollar that the issue is not really with the level of resilience or with the level of well-being of those individuals. Then actually we need to be looking wider and going, what is going on in this organization? What are the factors that are either promoting or detracting from mental health at work? So if I show you a collection from the research, if you did a meta-analysis of all the writing, thinking, practical research on burnout, what actually matters at work to support us to sustainably high perform and to prevent us from burning out, this is what matters. It is really important that we have support from our team and from our leaders. Why is that so important? From an evolutionary perspective, we are designed to be part of a tribe. I did it again. Last time I spoke to tribe, I was able to use my pun, and there you go again. I'm designed to be part of a group. We absolutely need people to flourish and to live well. We were not designed to live solo or to live alone, work alone. And you can think back to, us in prehistoric times. You're part of your tribe, you're out in the wild, you've got predators coming from, for you. You absolutely need your people around you to feel like you belong. When we feel like we don't belong, a evolutionary response is triggered in us. That's the sense of loneliness, and it drives us to connect. But it also means we're on edge. And if you think about people at work, if I am on edge because I don't feel like I've got a group around me that sees me for who I am, that understands me for who I am, that backs me, both from a peer perspective and a leadership perspective, then you think about what level of kind of adrenaline or cortisol is turned on for that individual all day, every day at work. One, from a productivity perspective, it's really difficult to produce good work in a long-term way if part of my brain is focused on social dynamics and whether I fit in. And so that kind of real sense of support, collegiality, good leadership and direction, feeling like I matter, that is absolutely critical for both boosting mental health and well-being and preventing burnout. Work design is another thing that is actually really important. So that's not about what we're doing in our roles, it's about how we are doing it, or how our work is set up to best support us to flourish and to minimize that long-term kind of disconnect, fatigue, burnout. SMART is an acronym. This model comes from Curtin University in Western Australia. Professor Sharon, a laureate professor in Western Australia, designed this model. It's an accumulation of her work for the past 20 years. And just to share this with you, what her work says is that actually, if we're going to prevent burnout, if we're going to support people to sustainably be well and perform at work, then, if we look across our team, are people stimulated in their roles? Are they able to have variety in their work? Are they able to use their strengths in their work? Are they able to have some sense of complexity where they actually have to engage their brains? And are we able to kind of problem solve and really feel like the work we are doing is interesting and challenging of us? So stimulation in work is important. Because many of you probably have seen a bell curve of stress before. And we often talk about the overload or feeling too stressed. But actually, if work is dull and boring and doesn't engage me, if we're at the start of that bell curve, if we're underwhelmed or understimulating, that actually is another type of stress on the body. So we need work to be stimulating. We need people at work to feel like they are getting a sense of satisfaction, to feel like they're able to actually achieve in their job. What does that mean on a weekly basis? Are people getting feedback on their work? Are people really clear about expectations? Is there a sense of what success actually means in connection to someone's tasks? The A is about agency or autonomy. And I think all of us know, if we feel like we're micromanaged, if we feel like we're unable to make decisions for ourselves, if we're not able to work in a way that is authentic to us, that is stressful because it sits out of congruence into how we would naturally be. So, Do I have an ability to make decisions on how I'm doing my work, when I'm doing my work? That's really important. Now, that doesn't mean if you're a business owner sitting on this call that you are needing to give your staff free rein. I think it's really important we have expectations. I think it's really important there's boundaries in all relationships. I think it's absolutely okay to say this component of this task you've got free rein on, but I want you to do that and then come back and check in with me. Or I think it's completely okay as an organization to say, we need time together. We know that people's well-being goes up when we have relationships, which is the R to this model. We know collaboration requires people to be together, and we're much more productive and effective at problem solving if we're in a room nutting that out together than everyone sitting on a screen. So agency doesn't mean that everyone gets to work fully flexible and you never see them and people get to go free rein. It's not about that at all, but it is about within someone's role, how do they get to employ their skill and their decision-making in a way where they feel like they have some agency over their work. The R we've spoken about in terms of relationships, and the T is obviously load. And I think many of you will have thought coming into this webinar, one of the major factors for burnout is there's too much to do and not enough time. I'm absolutely like looking at my list of everything I have to do, and it never eases up. We never get recovery. It's one deadline to the next, and that is just not sustainable. And so absolutely, of course, load comes into smart work design. And again, I think it's reasonable to say in your role, there may be periods of time that are high pressure. There may be deadlines. You may be in finance working to the end of the financial year, and the month before end of year is really busy, for example. But can you have a cadence within your team where there is some reprieve after a high pressure period of time? Because we can't expect people to just keep on going like a workhorse if we slam them with high load without recovery. So that's what that work design means on the list. If we go back, what else really matters to preventing burnout? Having a clear purpose as an organization and as a team, and actually for your individuals to be really clear what they're doing, having good training and development so people feel like they've got the skills to actually do their work. Because why stretch goals are useful, aka I'm in a new role or I've been given a new task, it's really helpful to stretch people so we just don't get comfortable. But we can't stretch people too much without giving them the skill sets because they need scaffolding. We all need scaffolding and able to stay well and work well. Having leaders that are able to know their people, check in with them, have an understanding of what's going on with them, pick up if things are getting wobbly, work with people collaboratively to put plans in place. That's the second to last one on that list. And finally, psychological safety is also really important to harnessing well-being and preventing burnout. And in a nutshell, psych safety is an interpersonal dynamic. It is based on all of us together as a team creating an environment where we can work together well, support each other, invite different perspectives, not slam people when they have an opinion, and together, if we can do that, we've got a higher chance of one, being innovative, but two, protecting people's well-being. So I suppose why I highlight this for you today is that often when speaking about burnout, people point to individual solutions as the way in which we protect health and prevent against burnout. What I want you to walk away from this webinar is that burnout often really is an environmental factor in the organisation. We all take ownership of mental health and wellbeing at work, and that the things that really matter in terms of protecting and preventing from burnout are on this list. Now, in my last 2 minutes before I hand over to Emma for questions, I suppose then it is, what is our role? Because it's not all on the organisation. Work and leaders and employees, there is a two-way relationship, and we do show up at work, and how we operate and what we do to kind of self-lead or to look after our own well-being does matter. And so I just wanted to share this model with you because I think it's an easy picture to remember. And really, this is my message to you, that no one ever in the world can operate and peak perform in every element of their life sustainably. We just can't do it. And I think, those of you that fall in my generation, I think we've been raised to be told that you can have it all and do it all. But actually, I think if you're burning the candle at all ends, or in this model, if you've got all 4 of these burners blasting at all times, your gas will run out. And so if you think about your life right now, you think about your health, you think about your work, you think about your whānau, your family, you think about your wider social connections and your friends. I want you just to think to yourself about what is really important to you now. Where do you want to be fully showing up? Where do you want to be doing your best? Where do you want to be peak performing? Because I think life comes in seasons. You know, you may be at a stage in your life where work is your number 1 priority. Perhaps you're trying to advance your career. Perhaps you're in a startup, you know, perhaps you're wanting to get to the next level, or you've got a new project you're really excited on. Maybe work is your focus and you've like turned up that gas cylinder on that work burner and you're going to let that fly. You know, for me, maybe it's my family. I got 3 girls, 5 and under. Actually, yep, work and friends and health are really important. But if I'm going to dial my family burner up, then something else is going to have to dial down. So if you think about your life in terms of those 4 burners, if you're really wanting to crank one burner, which burner are you prepared to turn down? Doesn't mean you turn it off, but it does mean that you turn it down. And so I suppose this is just one element of an individual focus around perception, where we put our time and energy, you know, and how we actively make decisions about our behavior and our time to best suit ourselves, so that we're not trying to always crank every element of our life up all the time. And that, you know, you can fiddle with those, that sometimes you can put one up and put one down, but really holding that concept in your mind about where are you going to prioritize, and as a result of that, which one will you turn down? So it's 12:22, Emma. I could keep going, but I'm going to pause because I'm hoping that actually there are questions there and I can answer some of those questions with perhaps other information that I've got in my brain. So I'm going to hand to you, Emma.
Oh, thank you so much. That was amazing. Thank you for sharing and imparting your knowledge with us. There are a lot of questions. I don't know how to select and go through them, but I'm going to start with one,
Okay.
Jackie, that says, do you have examples on how we can organize recovery periods at work while still managing priorities?
Sure. So I think that has to be by team or by individual. So I think if any organization sets up a blanket rule, like, oh, we're bringing in a masseuse into the office on Wednesdays, go and get a massage. You know, I just think those organizational wide strategies are helpful, but they probably won't cut it for everybody. Where I believe we have true impact is that if you have leaders that are having regular wellbeing conversations with their staff, and people probably like cower at that term, so make it a people check-in or a check-in, name it in a way that works for you. But if I've got a team and if I am checking in with them frequently, it might be weekly, fortnightly, monthly, 6-weekly, depending on the need of the individual. Some people have higher needs than others. If I have a running dialogue where I'm working and talking with someone and I know they've got a busy period of work coming up, or I know they've been slammed by a really tricky client that's been really demanding, or I know they've got a lot of life stuff going on, then if I have that continual dialogue, that provides me with an opportunity to go, hey, Emma, I know that it has been a really stressful, busy time. I don't think it's sustainable for you to be working at this peak level continually. I want to support you to get recovery. What's most helpful for you? What do you know is useful for you to be able to actually recover? And we can think about recovery in terms of mental recovery, physical recovery, social recovery, you know, physical recovery. So we can think about recovery in different ways. But Emma, let's actually have a collaborative conversation about what would be most useful for you. Is that looking at your caseload coming up, and actually we're going to see how many tricky people are on there and we're going to pull some of them out and give them to the team for the next round of projects? Is that actually you want a week in Fiji? Is that, you know, like what is it that's meaningful to you? And working it in that way rather than this broad blanket approach.
Yeah, and I think to that point, like when you use the analogy of like scaffolding. scaffolding is going to be different for every single person, right?
Yeah.
But if you don't have a connection and you don't have clarity, then you can't build the right scaffolding.
Correct. And I think that comes back, Emma, to that, double the amount of leaders are burnt out compared to staff, because I think that just highlights, right? To be a good leader takes capacity and energy and relationship building and focus with your team. And so you have to have the capacity in the team to do that individual leadership well.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, I have there's so many questions, and we will work out a way to communicate with everybody. But Jackie, you've been incredible, but we've only got time for one more, and I'm just trying to work through which one we're going to ask. But somebody said, at my work, there are a lot of band-aids. How can I help as an individual make changes at my workplace if I'm not in a senior management or people and culture role?
Yeah, and I think that's a really important question. And I suppose I go back to that model around what's in your control and influence.
Yeah.
And so if I go what's within your control is how you interact with your team, the discussions you have with your team. Perhaps it's like, hey, I went to this webinar. It was a discussion around burnout and workplace wellbeing. Do you want to watch the recording? Or actually, just as a side note, Emma, I run a podcast called What Matters Most. Antonia Prebble and I host that. About 2 weeks ago, we released an hour-long discussion on burnout. I know a lot of teams are like sending that out to their leaders and to their team members to listen to. So what can you control? You can control the conversation with your team. Hey, listen to this and let's come back and have a conversation. You can talk to your leader and say, I think it'd be really helpful if we together as a team sat down and spoke about, do we have a clear purpose? Do we have team norms around how we communicate with each other, how we make decisions, how we, get recovery and looking at the calendar through the year? Like, you can control in terms of your behavior and your impact with your individual team members.
Absolutely.
Then from an influence perspective, who do you need to connect with in your organization? Is there a wellbeing group in your organization? Can you start to build a relationship with a senior leader that they have then control and influence over the wider organization? How do you be strategic about who you start to educate in a way that feels collaborative and collegial rather than forceful?
Yeah, great answer. Great answer. And I think that some of the other themes of the questions have been about how authentic wellbeing groups can be and what they are doing within organizations. And so I think that the scaffolding connections and clarity point really works well. So Jackie, we've got 1 minute, but I just wanted to end by saying thank you so much for being here with us and our clients. Thank you for imparting your knowledge, speaking so beautifully and articulately. And I think that people will have got a lot out of this. So thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for coming. And hopefully this has been of use.
Jackie from our Wellington boardroom.
I know, it's so flash. I'm used to sitting in my garage at home.
But thank you. We appreciate it more than anything. And if we can build connections and we can send any questions on to you, Jackie, we will.
Thanks so much. Ka kite,
Thanks
everybody.
for attending, everybody. You've been wonderful. Thank you.